The sky over Karsus 9 was not empty. It was alive. Shadows moved across the clouds, and the wind carried the roar of wings that could crush cities. People in the settlements below whispered the name of the one who ruled the sky, the Dragon King. For thousands of years, no human army had stood against him and lived. Entire fleets had vanished, leaving only smoke and silence. No weapon, no fleet, no soldier had ever touched him. Yet, on a small rocky plain far from the nearest city, one man stood alone. Sergeant Halden Mercer adjusted his visor and looked up. The wind tugged at his worn combat suit, but he did not move. Around him, the ash-strewn ground was quiet, except for the distant echo of wings. Most soldiers had already fled the plains, retreating toward safer ground. Some had laughed at him for staying. Others had said he was foolish. Halden did not answer them. He knew what they could not see. The Dragon King's power was real, terrifying, and unstoppable if met with force. But Halden believed humans could win in a different way. Not by fighting the Dragon King with swords or lasers. Not by charging into his flying army and hoping to survive. Humans had tools. Humans had minds. And Halden had a plan. He crouched beside a small metal beacon half buried in ash and sand. To an outsider it looked like junk, a scrap of abandoned machinery. But Halden knew its purpose. It was the first piece of a trap so vast that no dragon could imagine it. He checked the connections and tapped the controls. The device hummed softly. Only a trained human could notice the subtle vibrations, the hidden power locked inside the unassuming frame. Above him the clouds shifted. Shapes moved, enormous and terrifying. The Dragon King's army was coming. Thousands of dragons, each one the size of a small mountain, flew in tight formation. Their scales shimmered with colors humans had no names for, eyes glowing with heat and ancient intelligence. Firelight flashed across the sky as their throats opened and closed, and wind surged down to the plains like a storm of steel. The Dragon King appeared last, larger than any dragon Halden had ever seen. His wings spanned farther than a city block. His scales were black as night, rimmed with gold. His eyes burned like suns, and even from hundreds of meters below, Halden could feel the heat. The Dragon King's voice cut through the roaring wind. "Human," it said. The sound shook the rocks around Halden, a thunder that made him stagger slightly. "You dare stand alone? You are nothing. Kneel, and I may let your world survive for a moment." Halden straightened and adjusted his visor. He spoke calmly, almost casually, as if answering a neighbor. "I'm not here to kneel. I'm here to win." The Dragon King laughed. The sound was a gale, a crushing roar that seemed to make the ground tremble. "Win? Against me? Against my army? Foolish little creature. You have no fleet, no weapons, no chance." Halden's hand rested on the beacon. His heart beat steadily, even as the first wave of dragons passed over him, their wings stirring dust into a whirlwind. "I don't need a fleet," he said. "I don't need weapons. All I need is patience, planning, and a little cleverness. You'll see soon enough." Around the edges of the plain, the few remaining soldiers who had stayed hidden peeked from their positions. They whispered among themselves. Some still doubted Halden. Some hoped he was right. But none could guess what he had prepared. No human had ever done something like this before, and most dragons had never faced humans who thought differently. The Dragon King circled above, the largest shadow in the sky. "I will burn you," he said, and the fire in his throat glowed like molten metal. "I will crush every human who dares follow you." Halden smiled behind his visor. "Then you'll have to come close enough for me to show you something," he said. His eyes scanned the horizon, following the formation of the flying army. Every ruined city, every abandoned bunker, every cracked road below was part of a pattern. To the Dragon King it looked like retreat, like weakness. To Halden it was geometry. It was the lines and shapes of a trap. He could feel the air around him vibrating with the power of the approaching dragons. Yet Halden did not flinch. Every plan he had laid, every calculation he had made, had led to this moment. If he could survive the first approach, if he could trigger the device at the right moment, he could turn the strongest army in history into prisoners, not by fighting them but by outthinking them. The Dragon King's wings blotted out the sun. The first dragons passed directly overhead, fire licking the clouds. Halden's breath was steady. The world below held its breath. A storm of wings, fire, and shadow was about to enter a trap it could not see. And the human who built it? He was ready. The legend of the Dragon King had ended for all others. But today, a human soldier stood alone, calm, confident, and prepared to do what no one thought possible. Halden Mercer did not move from his position. even as the wind carried the roar of the Dragon King's army across the plains. He crouched beside the small metal beacon, checking its connections again. To the untrained eye, it was nothing more than an old piece of machinery half buried in ash. But Halden knew better. This was the heart of a trap that would turn the sky itself into a prison. For weeks, human forces had retreated across Karsus 9, leaving cities empty, bunkers burned, and supply lines destroyed. On the surface it looked like defeat. Smoke rose from every ruined settlement. Soldiers whispered fearfully about the Dragon King's wrath. Yet every destroyed building, every abandoned road, every cratered battlefield formed a precise pattern. It was a map invisible from the ground but perfectly visible from the sky. Halden had spent months calculating it, measuring angles, and testing invisible energy fields. Every retreat was a step closer to the trap's activation. Around him, the remaining soldiers waited in hidden positions. They were few, a dozen men and women, the last of Halden's squad. They kept their eyes on the sky, hearts pounding as the Dragon King's army approached. Some of them still doubted, shaking their heads at the idea that one human could challenge the unchallenged. Halden, however, had the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what would happen next. The first dragons appeared on the horizon, cutting through the clouds like moving mountains. Each one was enormous, wings stretching farther than any human had ever measured. Their scales shimmered in the sunlight, gold and silver, black and crimson, and their eyes burned with intelligence and fire. Behind them, the Dragon King led his flying host, his massive wings folding and unfolding with terrifying grace. He looked down at the humans and his voice rolled across the plains like thunder. "You cannot hope to stop me, human. The sky belongs to me. Step aside and I may leave your world intact." Halden stood, his hand resting on the beacon. "The sky may belong to you now," he said calmly, "but soon it will belong to no one, and I will show you why." The Dragon King's laughter shook the air. "You are alone. You have no fleet, no weapons, no chance." Halden smiled, almost imperceptibly. "I don't need weapons. I don't need a fleet. I just need you to fly where I want." As the dragons drew closer, Halden activated a small console built into the beacon. A soft hum filled the air, almost imperceptible at first, like the vibration of a distant engine. The hum grew, subtle at first, then stronger. It was not loud enough to frighten the dragons, not enough to break the human ears on the ground, but it was the first signal of the trap coming alive. From their hidden positions, the squad watched quietly. Halden had trained them for this moment. They had spent weeks learning exactly how to manage the gravitational field generators hidden beneath the ruins. Each generator was small on its own, almost invisible, but when activated together they formed a massive network, an invisible lattice stretching across the sky. The Dragon King's army passed over the first set of nodes. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The dragons circled, feeling the air shift slightly, sensing a strange resistance in the wind. Halden's mind raced through calculations, checking angles and force ratios. One wrong move and the trap could fail. But everything was in place. Below the dragons, the ruined cities and bunkers had another purpose. Each building, each road, and each crater acted as a guide for the invisible lattice above. The Dragon King could see only weakness. He thought humans were retreating. He thought they were afraid. He thought he could crush them easily. But the humans had used fear itself as a weapon, shaping the enemy's perception to lead them straight into the trap. The first wave of dragons passed the central point, and Halden pressed a final control on the beacon. Across the sky, the hum of the generators shifted, coalescing into a low vibration that stretched over hundreds of kilometers. The invisible lattice activated. The air itself seemed to grow heavier, bending and pressing down on the massive wings above. Dragons beat their wings harder, fire spewing from their throats in confusion, but they could not escape. Halden kept his eyes on the sky, scanning every movement. The Dragon King roared, sensing the first hints of resistance. His army began to struggle as invisible forces tugged and twisted around them. "What is this?" he thundered. "You dare bind the sky? You cannot." Halden's hand did not tremble. "It's not magic," he said quietly. "It's human ingenuity. It's planning. It's thinking ahead. We don't need to fight with fire to win." Around him, the squad members activated small secondary consoles. The hum grew louder, reinforcing the lattice, making the invisible cage stronger. The dragons thrashed, their wings cutting through the wind in desperation, but the human's trap held firm. The Dragon King realized that what he saw as retreat was actually precision. What he saw as weakness was intelligence. And that intelligence had turned the tables on him. Halden watched, calm and steady. The sky was alive with dragons struggling against a force they could not see. And below, on the rocky plains, humans waited silently. They had not used brute strength. They had not thrown themselves at the enemy. They had simply outsmarted the unthinkable using geometry, science, and patience. The Dragon King's army, the pride of the sky, was beginning to enter a cage of human design. And Halden Mercer, standing alone on the ash-strewn plain, knew that the trap was only just beginning. The sky above Karsus 9 was filled with movement, a storm of wings, scales, and fire. The Dragon King's army glided through the clouds with terrifying grace, unaware of the invisible danger that waited. Halden Mercer stood on the rocky plain, his hand resting on the beacon, eyes fixed on the formation above. Every calculation he had made, every adjustment, every hidden generator, was about to prove itself. Then, at the exact moment, he pressed the final sequence. A hum surged through the air, deep and vibrating, carrying a power that the dragons could not see but could feel. The wind shifted. The clouds twisted. And then the air itself seemed to solidify around the flying host. At first it was subtle. Dragons flapped harder, but their wings moved slower. Their fire bursts curved strangely, spinning into the wind rather than flying forward. Panic began to ripple through the ranks. The Dragon King roared, a sound that shook the plains below. What trick is this? What fools dare bind the sky? Halden did not answer. He stayed calm, breathing steadily behind his visor. It's not a trick, he said to himself. It's a trap. And it's working. Above, the invisible lattice of human design tightened. The first rows of dragons found themselves unable to fly straight. They tried to ascend, but gravity shifted against them. They tried to turn, but the air resisted. Even the Dragon King, vast and powerful, felt his wings struggle under the invisible force. For the first time in his life he realized he was not free in the sky. The smaller dragons crashed into one another in confusion. Fire erupted not from attack but from panic. They clawed at the wind, trying to break through the invisible barrier, but the lattice held. Halden watched, heart steady, as the patterns he had drawn on the ground took form in the sky. Cities, craters, roads, all part of a map no dragon could read, now controlled their flight. Impossible, the Dragon King hissed, his voice trembling with rage. Humans cannot contain me. Halden pressed another control, and the hum of the generators grew stronger. The invisible cage stretched across hundreds of kilometers, glowing faintly in the sky like a soft light only humans could detect. Each node, each anchor point he had planted on the ground, now pulled on the dragons in perfect unison. Wings that had split clouds for centuries now beat against an unseen wall. Fire breathed from their throats, twisted in the wind, harmless. Around him, the remaining human squad members watched in awe. They had trained for this moment, they had prepared for this exact coordination, but nothing could replace the sight of dragons, massive and furious, struggling in the sky. No human weapon could have forced them into submission. But the brilliance of the trap did it without a single soldier needing to fire a shot. The Dragon King descended lower, trying to break free with raw strength. His roar was louder, shaking rocks from the mountains and scattering ash across the plains. But the more he struggled, the stronger the invisible bonds became. The lattice had been designed to respond to force, to adapt to every wing beat, every turn, every desperate thrust of the dragons. It was as if the sky itself had joined the human side. Halden's voice was calm, almost gentle as he spoke into his calm. All nodes are stable. The lattice is holding. The enemy is contained. One of his squad members, a young engineer named Varen, looked at him with wide eyes. Sir, it's incredible. They're trapped. Halden nodded. Not trapped in chains. Trapped in our plan. Every step they took brought them here. Every roar they breathed, every wing beat, led them to the cage. He looked up at the Dragon King, massive and furious, and allowed himself a small smile. They thought we were weak. They thought we were afraid. And now, the strongest force they've ever known is caught by human intelligence. The dragons thrashed in the air. Fire lit the clouds like lightning, and the Dragon King slammed his wings, creating storms that shook the plains below. Yet the human's trap did not falter. It absorbed the force of every wing beat, redirected every surge of fire and motion into the cage itself. The flying host, which had once ruled the skies without challenge, now moved only as Halden allowed. A moment of quiet passed, and then Halden activated the secondary sequence. The cage solidified further, glowing faintly and shimmering like heat over a desert. The Dragon King froze mid-flight, understanding finally what had happened. You are clever, he said, voice low and dangerous. I underestimated you, human. But this cannot hold forever. Halden's hand rested lightly on the console. It doesn't need to hold forever, he said calmly. It only needs to hold long enough to change everything. From hidden positions the human fleet began to arrive. Not warships, not weapons of mass destruction, but large, industrial haulers, specially reinforced to secure and relocate the dragons. Boarding ropes, magnetic anchors, and containment devices extended from the ships. The trapped dragons had no choice. The humans were taking control of the sky without firing a shot of traditional weaponry. The Dragon King's eyes blazed with fury and disbelief. You, humans, will regret this. Halden adjusted the beacon again. Regret? Perhaps. But today you will learn that human strength is not just in arms. It is in thinking, in planning, in outsmarting the impossible. The sky is not yours by birth. It is won by mind and patience. The flying host thrashed, the air bending and twisting with their power, but Halden's trap held. The first part of humanity's plan had worked perfectly. The dragons, mighty and ancient, were caught, helpless in the invisible cage of human design. And on the plains, the soldiers who had hidden, who had doubted, now understood fully, the unthinkable had happened. Humans had trapped the strongest force in the sky, not by fighting it, but by thinking it into submission. Halden breathed steadily behind his visor, eyes never leaving the Dragon King. The trap had sprung. And this was only the beginning. The dragons struggled, filling the sky with roars, fire, and fury, but the invisible cage held firm. Halden Mercer watched from the rocky plain, calm and steady behind his visor. His hand rested on the beacon, his eyes scanning the massive flying host trapped above. Every calculation had worked perfectly. Every node in the lattice was active. The Dragon King and his army were caught, unable to escape. But Halden did not want to destroy them. Humans had survived countless threats, yet they had always found ways to turn enemies into lessons, not just casualties. He knew that strength alone could not win forever. It was cleverness, restraint, and planning that made humanity truly powerful. And today he would show the Dragon King that humans fought differently. From the hidden fleet beyond the mountains, massive human haulers began to arrive. These were not warships built for destruction. They were industrial behemoths, reinforced for lifting, holding, and moving the dragons safely. Maglocks, containment anchors, and boarding lines extended from each ship, glowing faintly as they connected with the dragon's scales. The flying host thrashed in panic, but the cage held them in place, and the anchors began to secure them one by one. The Dragon King dove toward Halden, fury in every movement. "You think you can move us?" he thundered. "You think you can control the sky itself?" Halden's voice was calm, even gentle. "I don't want to control you forever," he said. "I just want to protect the rest of the galaxy. You are too dangerous to roam freely. You are not being imprisoned. You are being relocated." The Dragon King froze, confusion flickering across his enormous eyes. He had fought humans before and he had laughed at them every time. But this was different. Humans were not attacking. They were not trying to kill. They were thinking. They were using the same cunning that had allowed tiny creatures to survive on planets far weaker than theirs. And now they had outsmarted him. Halden keyed another control on the beacon. Far above the trapped dragons, a faint glow appeared in the sky. It grew steadily, forming a massive ring of energy, the relocation gate. Its edges shimmered with light, bending the air and space around it. It was enormous, bigger than any dragon, bigger than any city, and it pulsed with quiet power. The human squad watched in awe. They had trained for this moment. They had prepared for the dangerous task of moving creatures so massive, so intelligent, so ancient. But the sight of the relocation gate made their hearts race. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, a machine designed not to destroy, but to move impossibly powerful life safely across the stars. The Dragon King's roar filled the air, louder than before. "You cannot do this. The sky is mine. My army is mine. You are nothing, human." Halden's hand rested lightly on the control. "You are wrong," he said. "You are strong. You are fast. You are smart. But we are smarter. You cannot think the way we think. You cannot see what we see. You cannot prepare for patience and planning. That is why today you will learn a new kind of power." One by one, the anchors on the human haulers latched onto the dragons. The smallest dragons were guided first, gently lifted toward the glowing gate. They roared and beat their wings, but the lattice of energy kept them steady. They could not escape. Even the Dragon King's massive claws could not break the force holding him in place. The gate pulsed brighter. Slowly, carefully, the haulers guided the flying host into the ring. Space twisted around the glowing portal, stretching and folding like water. Halden watched the Dragon King's eyes widen as he realized exactly what was happening. You are sending us away? Halden nodded. We are relocating you to a system with no inhabited planets. A place where you can live without threatening anyone. A place where you can fly freely but not harm others. We are not your enemies. We are your wardens. The Dragon King thrashed, fire and rage spilling from his throat, but the lattice held and the portal's pull was irresistible. The dragons, massive and ancient, moved into the gate one by one. Their enormous wings beat against the energy, but they could not resist the carefully calculated forces guiding them. Below, Halden's squad held their breath. Each human had worked for this moment, but nothing could prepare them for the sight of the entire flying host being moved safely across space. The sky, once ruled by a single king, now belonged to humans, not by violence but by intellect and planning. Finally, the last dragon entered the gate, and the relocation gate dimmed. The sky above Karsus 9 cleared. Clouds drifted peacefully. The wind no longer carried the roar of wings. Silence settled over the plains. Halden removed his visor, letting the ash and wind brush his face. He had done it. The Dragon King and his flying host were gone, not destroyed, not defeated by weapons but relocated. Humans had proven that they could survive not by brute force, but by thinking smarter, planning ahead and using patience as a weapon. Halden turned to his squad. Tell the fleets, he said quietly. The sky is free. And for the first time in thousands of years, the sky of Karsus 9 was truly human territory, not because humans had fought with fire, but because they had fought with mind, strategy and restraint. The sky above Karsus 9 was empty now. No shadows passed over the plains. No wings stirred the clouds. The wind carried only the quiet sound of ash shifting in the dust. For the first time in thousands of years, the sky belonged to no dragon, no king, no ruler. It belonged to humans. Sergeant Halden Mercer stood alone on the rocky plain, visor lifted, letting the wind wash over his face. He felt the quiet like a weight, a calm that only comes after something impossible has been achieved. Behind him, the remaining human squad slowly emerged from their hiding spots, faces pale, but eyes wide with awe. They had watched the Dragon King and his flying host vanish into the stars, guided by human hands, not destroyed by human fire. Varen, the young engineer who had been at Halden's side throughout the operation, stepped forward. Sir, it's really over, he said softly. They're gone. We did it. Halden nodded, but he did not smile. Not yet. There was something heavier than victory in his chest, responsibility. Yes, he said. They're gone from this sky. But we didn't defeat them with weapons. We didn't win with brute force. We won because we were smarter. We thought ahead. We stayed calm. And we used every advantage our minds could find. Around them, the plains were quiet. The ruined cities, the burned bunkers, the roads twisted with craters, everything that had seemed like retreat or failure was now revealed as a chessboard. Every step humans had taken, every small sacrifice, had led to this moment. The Dragon King had thought humans were weak, foolish, and disorganized. He had been wrong. Halden knelt in the ash and touched the ground. The sky belongs to no king, he said quietly. But it belongs to those who plan, who build, and who think. The human squad gathered around him. Some laughed softly, relief spilling from their lips. Others were silent, staring at the horizon where the sky met the distant mountains. None could forget what they had seen. Dragons thrashing helplessly, their fire bent by invisible forces, the mightiest of them all carried into a distant system by human ingenuity. From the highlands, the human fleet returned, ships gliding silently through the upper atmosphere. They were not weapons of war but transporters and haulers. They had secured the dragons, moved them safely and returned without a single casualty. To the humans watching from below, the fleet's return felt like a quiet victory march. They had done what generations before them had called impossible. Halden looked up at the empty sky and allowed himself a small, rare smile. We didn't just survive, he said. We proved that humans can shape the impossible. We don't have to be the strongest. We just have to be the cleverest. Varen stepped closer. Sir, what happens now? Do we tell the worlds? Do we celebrate? Halden shook his head. We don't celebrate what we take. We celebrate what we protect. The galaxy is safer now because of restraint, not fire. That is a victory worth more than any applause. The squad listened quietly, understanding that this was more than a battle. This was a lesson. Humans had faced the unthinkable, the strongest creatures to ever exist, and had turned what seemed like retreat into strategy, what seemed like weakness into victory. The Dragon King and his army were alive, relocated to a distant system where they could not harm anyone. They had not been destroyed. They had been outsmarted. The news would travel slowly across the galaxy, but when it reached other civilizations, one lesson would stand above all. Humans did not need overwhelming power to survive. They had something stronger. Halden turned his gaze toward the horizon, the mountains painted in the soft light of the setting sun. Other enemies will come, he said. Stronger, faster, more dangerous than dragons. But we will face them the same way. Not with fear. Not with anger. With planning. With patience. With mind. The squad nodded, feeling a quiet pride. They were small, fragile beings compared to dragons, yet they had done what no one else could. They had trapped the unthinkable, and the galaxy itself had learned that humans could not be ignored. Halden breathed in the dry, warm air of Karsus 9 and let himself relax for the first time in days. Every hum of the beacon, every calculation of the lattice, every adjustment of the relocation gate had worked. Every risk had been measured. Every fear had been controlled. And now the sky was free. He sat down on a rock, visor raised, and looked at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, the Dragon King and his army were alive, learning patience, guided by humans who had proven they could win without fire. Halden allowed himself to imagine the dragons looking back at Karsus 9 from their new home, realizing that humans had defeated them not with strength, but with intelligence. And for the first time in centuries, humanity could look up at the sky and see it as their own. The humans of Karsus 9 had won, not with violence but with vision. They had proven that the galaxy belonged to those who could think, plan, and endure. And Sergeant Halden Mercer, alone on the plain, knew that this was only the beginning of what humans could achieve. The Dragon King had once ruled the sky. Now the sky belonged to those who built the doors. And humanity had just opened the first one.